The LA Clippers look to break their two-game losing streak and get their first win with Russell Westbrook on the roster on Tuesday night against the Minnesota Timberwolves, but it would not be the case as the Clippers fell again after a poor shooting night. Does the 0-3 record with Russell Westbrook have anything to do with Russ? Or is it just a circumstance of a much bigger issue? Going to be talking about that on today's Locked On Clippers.
You are Locked On Clippers, your daily Los Angeles Clippers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, sir. You are locking in with the Clips. Thank you for making Locked On Clippers the first listen of your day, your team every day. I'm your host, Darian Vaziri, in my 18th season as a Clipper fan. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram at DimeDropperPod. And, of course, subscribe to my own YouTube channel, Dime Dropper, where a video of the game will be on my channel. Attended on Tuesday night, and it was the most demoralizing defeat I have felt as a fan this season. But before we get started on the episode, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is the official new sports betting partner for Locked On. And let's get right into it. The Clippers losing to the Minnesota Timberwolves, dropping their third game in a row, 108-101 at home. They are now 15-15 at home on the season. They are 0-3 with Russell Westbrook, and it is a problem. So in this episode, I'm going to be talking about whether that's because of Russell Westbrook or just part of a bigger issue. And I think you guys can already tell where I'm leaning. Even though I think this was the first game where Russell Westbrook, I wouldn't say he had a bad game. He had a good first half. A poor second half, even though he made some plays at the end, but it was a little too late. I think he had made more bad plays, per se, in the second half than good. And in this game, I think he absolutely is part of the defeat. But it's a bigger issue. You know, I think overall this game showed as it went on. I'm just going to give you an example. Last game, Bones Highland played. The game before that, he didn't play. This game, Zubac is back. Now you play 10 guys. For a while, we were staggering Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. Tonight, we didn't stagger. We had one unit of 5, and then slowly but surely, we brought in a total bench unit in the first half with Norman Powell, Eric Gordon, Terrence Mann, Mason Plumlee, and Nicholas Batum. And then in the second half, the Clippers did stagger Kawhi Leonard and Paul George and didn't even play Eric Gordon at all. And there were moments where they didn't just stagger Plumlee and Zubac. There were moments where they went small, even though the Clippers were getting absolutely destroyed on the interior. So the one thing that's sticking out to me, and that's a common trend, is it's just all new. It's just still working things out. This team has just added 4 new players. And Ty Lue, Russ, they keep saying it's going to take some time. But how long have we been saying it's going to take some time? That's the thing, is the Clippers don't really have time. This is now game 64. The Clippers are 33-31. All season long we've been saying it's going to take time. We're just working our way back. And right now, that lack of chemistry, I don't want to say lack of chemistry, but lack of chemistry on court, lack of rhythm, is really costing the Clippers, because every single one of these games feels really big, and it feels like a massive loss when they lose. Here's the thing. This game, to me, a lot of it offensively was just a poor shooting night. You know, the Clippers had 2 pretty good games offensively against Denver and against Sacramento, but just a few things went wrong in those games that made them lose. A couple of mental mistakes, questionable decisions by Ty Lue. But in this game, you saw a not very great performance and still some questionable decisions by Ty Lue. But as far as the field goals, 42% from the field for the Clippers. However, they did shoot 39% from three, but where they absolutely lost the game, and it's been a common theme all season long, is the turnovers. 24 turnovers for the Clippers. They continue to just get careless with the ball, and it was nobody in particular. Every single player, it seemed, that played, besides like Eric Gordon, who didn't play in the second half, seemed to get multiple turnovers. And Paul George and Russell Westbrook absolutely start that avalanche. Paul George with 3 turnovers, Russell Westbrook with 4. And you know what? I can't leave Kawhi Leonard out, who also had 3. And then Nicholas Batum has 4. Mason Plumlee has 3. I mean, it was just a mess. And you got to give the Timberwolves credit. Their defense, their length, their athleticism, their youth, it was a factor. You know, Jaden McDaniels is a good player. Good length, contest Kawhi, and Kawhi was 7 for 19 in the game. And in large part, that's because of Jaden McDaniels. And also Rudy Gobert. You know, Rudy Gobert is a guy the Clippers have had their run-ins with in the past, but one thing that he really did a good job of was protecting the paint, what he always does. And he also did dominate on the inside in terms of on the glass. He had some nice finishes, surprisingly, when he was rolling to the basket. An and one against Kawhi Leonard rotating in the first half. And there was one time where he got the ball in the low post against Paul George and just trucked him like he was Shaquille O'Neal for a second. And Paul George, as well as Terrence Mann, had moments where they were switched on to Naz Reid or Gobert, and they got absolutely bullied. So if the Clippers want to play that switch everything defense, and they're going to have guys switched on to bigger wings, or wings in general, like Terrence, like Kawhi, Nico, Paul George, they got to hold their own a little bit better. And, you know, Russell Westbrook is a strong guard, so they've had him switching on to some bigs. But there were 2 times where he was cross-matched against somebody in transition, and Naz Reid, or a bigger defender, whether it was, I think it was Kyle Anderson once, Naz Reid another time, just spun off of Westbrook and got an easy basket. And Russ, I think in this game, he had an okay defensive game. He had moments where I thought overall he was good off the ball. I was paying really close attention. I had one of my best seats of the season, if not the best, like second row. I thought Russ did a good job contesting shots and fighting over screens. But there were a couple times, especially in the second half, where his one-on-one defense just fell apart. And I also thought that his shots were all short in the third quarter. And Kawhi Leonard in the second quarter and in the beginning of the third, all his shots were short. He looked like he had no legs. And they were just his routine mid-ranges that he normally makes. And in the second quarter, Paul George was also fairly cold. Besides a spot-up 3 he got from Russell Westbrook, the other points he got were free throws in the quarter. He and Kawhi Leonard went ice cold, and the Clipper bench didn't do a very good job as Naz Reid dominated them. But part of it's because also Norman Powell was ice cold. So a mixture of them being ice cold and turning the ball over too much is the main factor, in my opinion, in which the Clippers lost this game. Too many turnovers, an off night. I mean, as far as Kawhi Leonard, he may have been due for an off night, but you just can't afford it right now. And it sucks because it makes it feel like Kawhi Leonard has to play great for the Clippers to win, and it shouldn't be that way when you have arguably the deepest team in the league. But the moral of the story is when you constantly have all these changes, it may not be Russell Westbrook's fault. So the answer to this is, it's not necessarily Russell Westbrook's fault, but the reason why I was skeptical of the move was bringing in another player just makes Ty Lue's job harder, and he hasn't been doing a great job maximizing this roster. Again, Marcus Morris started, and in this game, his confidence looked like it was at rock bottom. He couldn't do anything. I mean, in the first quarter, that was the only quarter, in my opinion, that the Clippers played well. I thought they were okay in the fourth, but they still made too many mental mistakes, had too many turnovers, and just did not hit enough shots. But in the first quarter, I thought the Clippers were really solid, and that's why I felt good after that quarter that the Clippers were going to win the game, because the defensive intensity was sharp. And the starters started out really well. I mean, Kawhi Leonard hit 2 threes coming off screens, but for the most part, he was off the ball and he was, letting the game come to him. And Paul George was the one that started out with a couple of jumpers coming off screens. And Russell Westbrook was just picking his spots, passing it to Paul George and Kawhi coming off screens, right in their shooting pocket, driving and kicking, doing his Russ thing. I thought he was awesome. And Zoo was clearly making his presence felt. But that second unit, I don't think it did poorly, but Terrence Mann and Norman Powell didn't have a very good first half. I mean, Norman Powell didn't have a very good game. He was poor for the first three quarters, got going in the fourth on some typical fourth quarter Norman. But Terrence didn't have a great game where he got scored on a couple times, whether it be off the bounce or he got blown by or he got bullied around the basket. And a couple times he was switched on to Naz Reid or cross-matched against him, picking him up in transition. And he allowed 2 offensive rebounds. So Terrence Mann is still amazing. I mean, he's great in his role. He's going to have some not so great games, but the substitution patterns and just the rotations, they just seem all over the place. Ty Lue hasn't figured it out. It's going to take him some more games to do so, but that's the problem. The Clippers just don't have much time, and it looked like they were starting to pick it up before the All-Star break, but then they ended up getting Russ. However, I now don't believe that the Clippers were a championship team before Russ because Paul George could not have been the primary ball handler on this team. He couldn't. And Terrence Mann and Eric Gordon, they're good. They're decent. But to me, those guys, that point guard by committee, I just don't think we would have won the championship that way. Now, whether you think we have a better or worse chance with Russ, I don't think there's a wrong answer there. But I think there is something that Russ has shown me that we lacked before we got him, and that's that Paul George is just not a very good passer. He has good vision, but his actual execution, passing mechanics, as I call them, are poor. I was there tonight. He had a couple passes that were fairly routine or should just not be thrown, and he still throws them. There was one pass where Terrence Mann was slipping a screen, and Paul George just telegraphed it the whole way. And Jordan McLaughlin did a really good job stealing it, but it was very obvious that it was going to get stolen. And things like that make me realize that we weren't going to win the championship before we got Russ, but I'm not sure we are even with Russ. And right now, there's no reason the Clippers should even be talking about championship. These are not championship tendencies, and we've been talking about it from day one. The lack of continuity, lack of chemistry. They've been extra conservative with resting, extra conservative with minutes restrictions. Ivica Zubac was on one in this one, and that's part of the reason why the Clippers didn't stagger Mason and Zoo. I think their plan was to do that, but they were just forced to go small for stretches. And one thing that I thought was appalling was even after the terrible first quarter that Marcus Morris had, he still came back in to end the first half. And I think that the end of the first half should be where, typically in my life watching basketball, it's where you put your starters in, but if there's a bench player that is better than a starter, or basically your best 5. And the Clippers don't know what their best 5 is, but you got to feel it out in the game. And Marcus Morris absolutely wasn't the answer to that. But coming up, going to be talking about another thing that stuck out to me in this game, and also going more in depth about the performances of Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, and Russell Westbrook. Going to be doing all that coming up. But before we do that, got to talk about FanDuel. FanDuel is the #1 sports betting app out there. It's the midway point of the NBA season, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line up point scores and threes drained. This week, some interesting bets out there. Looking at the schedule for the first day of March on Wednesday, Kevin Durant is making his Suns debut. All eyes will be on them against the Charlotte Hornets. And obviously, if I'm taking the Suns, whatever the point spread is, especially with LaMelo Ball being ruled out for the remainder of the season, I am going with the Suns. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with the same game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, so the Clippers with what I think is one of the most disappointing losses of the season, just given how badly the Clippers needed to win this game. Every loss just feels monumental at this point. But let's look more at the performance of the stars. Kawhi Leonard, he had a rough one. I thought in the first quarter he was good. He let the game come to him. I thought his defense was pretty good. He had really good hands. And every single time there's a scramble for a loose ball and Kawhi's hands are in the scrum, I think Kawhi's going to get it every time because of his gigantic hands. And sitting as close as I was in this game, it really sticks out how large his hands are. Connie Hawkins, Dr. J, like. But he just had a tough one. And you got to give credit to the Wolves defense, but his shots were just short. And I always say that his shots are short given his flat release, but extra short in this one, which tells me he didn't have much legs. Second quarter, he came back in the game with like 5 minutes left in it, and his shots were really short. Like, even more short than just your normal misses. He didn't have a point, I don't think, in the second quarter. Paul George was ice cold. I wouldn't say ice cold, but just his misses were really off to the right, not straight away. Not straight on, long, or short. They were wayward. And then in the third quarter, Kawhi got going towards the end of it, but he still was missing shots short in the beginning of it. And to only have 3 points in the fourth quarter, overall, we've blown too many close games, even with Paul George and Kawhi. And yes, Ty Lue has not maximized the lineups at the end of games, but Kawhi Leonard and Paul George have not done a good enough job closing. I think that mainly goes to Paul George and his recklessness with the ball and him sometimes not giving the ball to Kawhi. And I think it's gone to the point, even though he didn't have a very good game, where we need to force feed Kawhi in the last 5 minutes of a game. He needs to go be like on some MJ Kobe stuff or like how he was in Game 6. No, give me the ball every single time. Paul George, you go spot up and be my Robin. Because Paul George is just too cute with the ball. It's just, and he takes long jumpers all the time that it's very hit or miss. Kawhi Leonard, at least, that mid-range when it's on, it's usually on. It's just cash and it's a much higher percentage shot and he's more physical. So Kawhi Leonard, and he's the man of this team. He needs to demand the ball. They need to give it to him all the time. And here's the thing. I know he gets kind of tired. I really know he does. But that's why you brought in Russ, right? That's why you have the depth to preserve him, to be able to get the ball multiple times down in a row in the end of a game and make plays. That's what you got it. That's what we have to have. This wasn't a good game for him. Point blank. But the fact that it was a poor game for other guys as well makes it tough. Kawhi Leonard, 23 points. And I also think Kawhi hasn't been flawless closing either. There's been games where he just missed towards the end of games. I wouldn't say that was Denver or Sacramento, but there have been games where he just missed towards the end. Needs to be better. And a lot of times we talk about how he runs out of legs, he gets tired. Are those, I have to ask, are those realistic concerns for someone that's a realistic? Do we make excuses for Kawhi in terms of being able to still lead a team to the championship? I have no doubts in my mind that he's going to be awesome in the playoffs. I definitely think he will be. But we're talking winning the championship, not getting into the second round, not to the conference finals. Will his body be able to hold up? That doesn't mean get injured, but I mean, will he be able to gut? Because in the fourth quarter, your stars need to be stars in the playoffs. You need to will your team to win games sometimes. I don't care how good your supporting cast is. Every star that hasn't had an insanely unfair team has had to do it. Every star has had to do it. They have to have those big games, fourth quarters. That's what happens in the playoffs. And Kawhi Leonard did that in 2021 before he got hurt for the Clippers. Can he do that again? Because it seems like we say a lot about him getting tired and running out of gas. Well, in the playoffs, it's going to be high-intensity ball and a lot of minutes. But, Kawhi right now is the least of the Clippers' worries. Paul George shot well in this game, but he shot more than Kawhi. I know he had it going more, but it just felt like we drew more plays for him. Kawhi, by the way, played 39 minutes. Paul George played 35. So the fact that they both played a pretty decent amount of minutes, and it was the second half they basically played almost the whole thing, more so out of desperation. And obviously we took Eric Gordon out of that second half rotation. Paul George had 25 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists, 3 steals, and his steals were just rotating on a Gobert and doing a good job stripping the ball, especially in the second half. But I also thought Paul George got bullied a couple of times, and I think he's at fault for a good amount of miscommunications a lot on defense, and he needs to be sharper there. But 25 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists, 3 steals, and 3 turnovers. Same amount of assists as turnovers is no good, and just the turnovers he makes are just insanely head-scratching. 10 for 21 and 3 for 8 from 3 is a good percentage. But it's just tough because it just didn't feel like enough in the fourth quarter. And in the second quarter when they went through a drought and Kawhi was also missing, Paul was missing. So it just still feels worse than just an efficient game. I just still don't think it's enough. I don't think it's necessarily a good Paul game. He was solid. solid. I thought he was good in the third. Good in the third, good in the first. But if you're not good in the fourth, it doesn't matter if you're just good in a couple of quarters. The fourth is the most important. And Paul George and Kawhi weren't good enough. And overall, the main takeaway to me is the Clippers looked old and slow. The only starter the Clippers have that's in their 20s is Zubats, which makes me come to the final point of this segment. It's to the point now where if the Clippers start with Marcus Morris ever anymore for the rest of the season, you are asking to lose. Because you are just playing a player who does the same things but worse than your stars. The reason why you brought in Westbrook, the reason why you brought in John Wall, Bones Highland, these guys, is because you don't think that you pressure the rim enough. You want guys to get to the rim. Because the two best players on this team are older wings who don't get to the rim enough. That's why you brought in Russ. Paul George doesn't get to the rim enough. He doesn't get calls when he gets there. Kawhi Leonard doesn't have much burst. He never really was the quickest guy, but he especially doesn't have as much burst now. You brought these guys... You want them to have burst. Marcus Morris never gets to the rim. He's not quick at all. He doesn't get off the ground. He makes the Clippers even slower, even less athletic. It doesn't make sense for a Russ. He's good to be kicked, he's good for driving kicks for Russ, but there are other guys on the team that can do that, but also run with him in transition and cut. And Marcus Morris has just lost his confidence. Every time he got the ball, it was a turnover, basically. He missed wide open left corner threes in the first quarter that could have put us up double digits, and you never know, maybe it's a different game. And that's the thing. The Clippers missed so many timely threes. Norman Powell in the second quarter had one. And then the turnovers. Russ, this was the first game where I thought Russ had turnovers where it just was like, ugh. His handle was just poor tonight. Lost the ball 3 times just losing the ball, getting either stripped, or there was that one time in the fourth quarter where he stole the ball and was coming up the court full speed and just lost control of it and fell down. And all of Russ's shots in the second half were pretty much short. So the thing about Russ is, I don't mind the three. I don't like him taking threes. And he banked one in. He made one late, which I didn't mind him taking because the Clippers had basically already lost. But there was another one in transition where Ty Lue took him immediately out after. He should have passed it to Paul George because he was actually feeling it. That was a poor decision. But overall, when Russ is not making his mid-range and when teams are giving him that, because with Gobert, he's going to be in the paint. And Gobert was doing a really good job of deterring the Clipper players to going right to the paint. So they had to make their mid-range. And when Russ is not making anything outside the key, he becomes tough to play in that moment. And that's what it felt like in the second half. It did. And I mean, Norman Powell not having a very good game was just tough as well. It's just the Clippers need to start Terrence Mann or Nico Batum, preferably Terrence Mann. You need to put some youth in that starting lineup. And the longer they just continue to do this with Morris, I mean, we look at the minutes tonight. Terrence Mann may have played more than Senior, but only one more minute. Nicholas Batum played one less minute. Marcus Morris shouldn't be getting 21 minutes a game anymore. And Bones Highland didn't play at all. And he adds some rim pressure, and I don't even want to start with Robert Covington, who a lot of fans are pleading for to play. The Clippers look old and slow, and they need to play these younger, more athletic guys because Minnesota just was getting into the paint much easier. Simple as that. But coming up, I'm going to end it by looking at all the performances of the players and talking about if there still is hope for the Clippers to turn this around and be a championship team. Going to talk about that coming up. All right, so let's read the box score for this one. The Clippers lose it 108-101. They outscore the Wolves 33-26 after the first quarter. Second quarter, 32-23 in favor of Minnesota. Naz Reid was absolutely dominating us. He's a good player. He can handle the ball. When he gets the rebound and just takes it all the way, it makes you cross-match. So, whoever's closest to him will guard him, and that may not be the guy that's actually supposed to guard him, like your center. And a couple of times, Terrence Mann, Russell Westbrook, they paid the price with Naz Reid's ability to bring the ball up and, bring the ball up, picked up by a guard, and then post him up. And then there were a couple of times Mason Plumlee, once or twice, gave him a head of steam, and he ran into Mason, and it was hard for the Clippers to play defense without fouling. And there were also a couple of ticky-tack fouls around the rim, especially called against Kawhi. But it is what it is. I thought Ivica Zubac in his return was good, 12 points, 9 rebounds, but only played 28 minutes. And in a game where Gobert and Naz Reid were dominant, you just wish he could have played more. But of course, he's on the minutes restriction. Mason Plumlee, 14 minutes. Thought he did some really good things, played defense, had 5 points, 9 rebounds, but 3 turnovers is just too much. I know he likes to dribble the ball and push it, but he has to take care of the ball or else we can do without that because we don't need that. It's just an added luxury. Nico Batum was pretty quiet, especially in the first half, which made me so shocked that he didn't play more than senior. But 3 points, to end that first half, because he had been quiet, senior had been bad, and Nico hadn't played as much. But 3 points, 3 rebounds, 3 steals, but 4 turnovers for Nico, just some bad reads. He only shot 1 time, and it was a 3, and he made it. Norman Powell, I think this one play summarized the whole game. Clippers are down by 4, picking up momentum late in the third quarter. Norman Powell tries to get fouled, which he always tries to do. Doesn't get it. He's screaming his head off at the ref. Nico Batum gets credited with the turnover for this, but passed it back to Norm, who was going to be wide open in the left corner. And Norm's too busy talking to the ref, and the ball goes out of bounds. And Kawhi Leonard was not happy with Norm. I saw him. He was like, dude, stay in the game. Those weren't his exact words, but that was basically what he was saying. Come on, you're complaining when the ball's still in play. So Norm, he missed a layup in the first half. He missed another layup in the second half. Missed a wide open 3. Just was a tough game for Norm, and I'm afraid, when he comes in that first half and then he just checks out of the game and doesn't check back in, just comes in for 1 stint in that first half, it's not enough for a guy that's leading the league in bench points. And that's my issue with the whole Russ thing, is bringing Russ has prevented Norman Powell so far from getting that consistent burn he was getting leading up to the All-Star break. And Eric Gordon, only 7 minutes. Yeah, he didn't do that much. He was a minus 13, but I just think that was a circumstantial thing. He hasn't looked good. But he shot 1 time coming off a curl, and Mason Plumlee ended up getting the offensive rebound, so it wasn't a bad shot. And I don't remember the other shot, but donuts across the board for EJ except for 1 rebound. And, there was a meet the player with him after the game, and he seemed like a happy camper and, just happy to be here still, but he could have just been putting on a good face. It's tough. It's a lot of minutes distribution things going on. We don't have that much time. Is there still hope? Yeah, if you believe in miracles. If you believe in miracles, there's still hope. But it's almost looking impossible for the Clippers to get a top 3 seed at this point. And I always said, if they don't get one, top 3 seed, they're not going to win. This regular season has been just from the medical staff to the coaching staff. They have thrown so many regular season games away. They have not prioritized winning regular season games, thinking that they can show up to the playoffs and waltz in there and beat everyone's butt. But it just does not work like that. It just doesn't work like that. You have to develop good habits. You have to develop chemistry. You have to develop consistent lineups. And they haven't done that. While teams like Denver know what they're doing, teams like Boston know what they're doing. The same guys have been playing, and they've found that chemistry, rhythm, continuity, and are playing with confidence. The Clippers look like a different team every single night, and the lineups are different every single night. The players, it's just a mess. This is not how you win championship with this much roster turnover. But I hope I eat my words. Russell Westbrook had 14 points, 7 rebounds, 10 assists, a little bit of everything, 4 turnovers. But see, unlike Paul George, who has as many assists as turnovers, Russell Westbrook has 10 assists and was still creating a lot of good shots. But it was a tale of 2 halves for me with Russ. Great in the first, poor in the second. 5 for 11 for him, 2 for 3 from deep, 2 for 2 from the line. Let me know what you think in the comments. Should Russ have closed the game? And it's 2 questions. Should Russ have closed? And do you have nervousness or doubts about Kawhi Leonard's physical stamina to get close wins consistently in the playoffs against the best competition? Let me know. But the Clippers play against the Golden State Warriors and the Sacramento Kings on a back-to-back on Thursday and Friday. Huge, huge games. It does not get any easier from here. I don't even know what to say. I'm not confident about any games right now. Marcus Morris cannot start another game for this team, or they just should expect to lose. Ty Lue needs to figure it out, ASAP. It's not an easy job, I understand. And look, that's the price that they're going to have to pay for wanting Russell Westbrook. Even though I believe he's done really good things so far, and I love the fit with him on the team, it's just another player you have to incorporate in a season in which the Clippers have lacked chemistry and continuity. Thanks for making Locked On Clippers your first listen today. Now make your second listen, Game to Game NBA. Every moment, every top performance, every result. Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NBA, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. The age-old proverb continues, go Clippers. And by the way, Norman Powell, 13 points, 4 for 14. I think he's going to bounce back and hopefully play more than one stint in the first half. Either 2 stints or one longer stint where he ends the half. But we'll see. It's just, maybe it's better to expect nothing anymore and just say, we're not a championship team, so I'm not as disappointed. I don't know. Whatever works for you. Go Clippers. We bounce back against Golden State. All we need is one win, and it'll change the vibes. I truly still believe that. The age-old proverb continues, go Clippers.